Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Darwinian Delusions. I have a special guest with me today, and we're going to be speaking about the treatment of the people of East Turkestan by the Chinese government. Now, why is this important? Firstly, if you guys remember at the debate in Oxford a few weeks ago against cosmic skeptic Alex O'Connor, I brought up the issue that atheists speak about human rights. They pretend as if they are the champions of human rights. And here I'm speaking about obviously militant atheists. I'm not just speaking about anybody who disbelieves in God. Yet the issue of the treatment of the Muslim population under the Chinese government is not actually spoken about. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring to the video today an expert when it comes to East Turkestan and somebody that is originally from that area so that they can explain what is going on. How long has it been going on? What is the history? And most importantly, what is the solution that every single one of you can be involved in? And that solution, I hope, is something we're all going to implement, because I don't want this video to be another one of those feel-good videos and then afterwards we go away and we forget to implement it. So firstly, Assalamu alaikum Arslan.
Wa alaikum assalam, brother. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. So why don't you do a quick introduction about who you are and what your organization does?
Yeah, so my name is Arslan Hidayat, born and raised in Australia. My parents left East Turkestan, or what is known to the Chinese as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, right after the Cultural Revolution. So I team up with a bunch of other activists, and we mainly do our work on social media, whether it's on our own Twitter feeds or mainly our Facebook page called Talk to East Turkestan, where we update the public on the most recent articles, the most recent news, and the most recent videos that are coming out of East Turkestan. That's pretty much what I do. I'm an English teacher by trade, but in my other time, I do this activism, basically, to raise awareness about this issue.
Thank you very much for that. And Arslan, if you want to check his stuff out, he's been on BBC, he's been on prominent platforms speaking about East Turkestan. So today we're going to go in order, firstly in terms of history, because right now, in my introduction, I said East Turkestan. I didn't say Xinjiang, right? And it's important for the audience to understand what is East Turkestan, why are we calling it that? And let's begin off with that, please, Arslan.
Yeah, it depends on how far back you want to go. If we go to history, the Uighurs were actually the first Turkic group to accept Islam back in 934, if you didn't know this. And the Uighurs were actually the first Turkic group to actually leave the nomadic life, because generally Mongols/Turks were nomadic people, and they were the first people to sort of get into agriculture and settle down into groups and create a civilization. And even the word in the Turkish, if we have any Turkish fans watching now, Uyghur literally means civilized. So that's where the term comes from, if we go, say, it back to 1,000 years. There is this region, what we now know as Central Asia, all the way to Azerbaijan, to where we know now as Xinjiang or East Turkestan. All of this land was unofficially known as Turkestan. So within this Turkestan region, you have Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Dagestan even. And later on, these areas were pretty much ruled by what we call khanates or warlords. Then we have this split of East Turkestan and West Turkestan, and West Turkestan splits down right in the middle. The Russians come in, teach these Turkic nations nationalism, and then they break off into, because back in the day, if you asked any of those groups in the middle what they were, where they came from, they would answer you in two ways. They would either say that they were Turks, or that they would either say that they were Muslim. Those were the only two answers. And so through this nationalism, they broke off into their various Turkic nations, Uyghurs, Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, Kazakhs, various other groups. And then, but for thousands of years, the Turks/Mongol groups never really got on with China, and that's why you've got the Great Wall of China today. If we look into the say 150 years ago, you would have heard of something called the Manchurian Empire, and the people of East Turkestan basically had an 8-year war with the Manchu Empire, and eventually they took over East Turkestan and named it Xinjiang, which literally means new territory or new frontier in 1884. Eventually, the Manchu Empire was overthrown by the Chinese nationalists, and the Chinese nationalists took East Turkestan and they ruled them until 1933. Finally, in 1933, the East Turkestan Islamic Republic is established. But unfortunately, it doesn't go on for too long. And then we are again overthrown by the Chinese nationalists. It's not until 1944, with the help of the Russians, that we end up establishing another East Turkestan Republic in 1944. And that goes on for about 5 years until 1949. This is when the Chinese come in, promising us to that they will economically uplift us, just like they're saying now. They will provide us healthcare and move us into the the 1960s or 1950s. But eventually they officially annex us into the broader Chinese nation, naming us the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. We are autonomous by name, but the word autonomous means nothing. If true autonomy was given from day one, there wouldn't be this sort of independence movement. And you mentioned, why do we say East Turkestan instead of Xinjiang? Well, it's the equivalent of saying, why do we call Palestine Palestine and not Israel? It is, for us, occupied land. And the sooner people realize this, the more recognition we would get. And the Chinese narrative now is, they go, this land that is known as East Turkestan was never named East Turkestan, or it never exists, and that the Uyghurs themselves are Chinese, and so they are making this narrative. And finally, the state of what we know now as the Turkish Republic, they laughed at this, saying, you know what, we'll support you, China, but you can't make up these lies. So they're trying to play it off and completely wipe out our history, long history.
Yeah, that's really amazing stuff you've explained. I mean, a lot of people don't recognize this. I mean, you look at the map, and that region is huge, and very rich in resources. And China, you look at that, and you look at the borders, and you would never think in a million years that, wait, there's a country in between. But then when you start thinking about it, because right next to China is Afghanistan, is Pakistan, is Russia, with the southern Russian states being Muslim. So of course, it makes sense that there would have been some Muslim land here. Yeah. So now, obviously, you've given us a quick sort of history about East Turkestan, and we should call it East Turkestan. Now, I want to know, why is this region so important to China? Because obviously, China's put in a lot of effort in terms of, and I'm sure you're going to go into details about how it's moved in the Han population to, displace the indigenous Muslims there, the indigenous Uyghurs, and also it has incentives to do that. So why is this particular region so important to China?
Well, one, militarily, it's important because it borders with 9 other countries. You mentioned some of them: Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Russia to the north. Right below us is Tibet. So what's crazy is we border with Tibet, but the Tibetans have gotten all this recognition over the years, and with the Dalai Lama, and it's very well widespread. There are so many organizations that it's gotten to a point where there are not even Tibetans, voicing the voice for the Tibetans. It's basically Anglo white Europeans calling for the freedom of Tibet. Number 2, natural resources. We are the largest province in China. If we consider ourselves part of China, where we make up 1/6 of China, 80% of Chinese cotton comes from East Turkestan. So most likely, if you've ever bought a shirt from China, the cotton most likely came from East Turkestan.
Yeah.
China has become China because of East Turkestan. Your coal, your gold, your jade, all these important minerals and resources come from East Turkestan. So China, being the second most powerful superpower in the world, is because of this region. And with this migration, during the East Turkestan Republic, there are figures of less than 1%, 0.6% of Chinese population within East Turkestan. But now it's gotten to around 50-50 based on its most current statistics. If you look at current statistics, according to China, they say we are 11 million. But we say there is anywhere between 20 to 40 million. Again, it's very difficult to tell because we can't do any census, but they are constantly lowering our population rates. But at the same time, you may have heard of the one-child policy, which was established in 1980. For minorities like the Uyghurs, there was a two-child policy. So every third child, if you get caught, you are aborted regardless of where you are in term, or if you do end up giving birth, you are fined very heavily, and a lot of parents actually have to adopt their children away just so they can save their lives, or they'll register them under another family, and yeah.
This is just crazy. I mean, you just said 50% is now Han Chinese.
Yeah. According to current statistics, according to their statistics, yes.
Yeah. And I saw a video on Abdul Ghani, who is another activist with yourself. And this was a video on the channel Voice of East Turkestan, I believe it's called.
Talk to East Turkestan.
Sorry?
Talk to East Turkestan.
Talk to East Turkestan, sorry.
Yeah. No worries.
There was a Chinese man, and when we say Chinese, we speak about Han Chinese here, not Han Chinese. And he is telling others to come to East Turkestan and saying, you will get this, you will get this, you will get this. And I was thinking, that's ridiculous. This is exactly the sort of thing which happened that we read about in history books. This is what British were doing in terms of the Irish, right? They were sending in English people to replace the Irish. This is, what South Africa, what was happening in terms of, not Brazil, in terms of they were bringing in white European people to replace black people. So this is happening now. This is a historical. No one's talking about this.
Yeah. So you would have seen footage. So what happens is we have all these natural resources, but the Uyghurs themselves don't benefit. They have to go. They are forced or they are coerced to go and work in Chinese provinces, to make our iPhones, our Nike shoes. But the Chinese are brought over to East Turkestan with all these incentives: free homes, free education, double, triple the pay than any other Uyghur. So yeah, this is blatant occupation happening like on social media. For example, Israeli occupation, they bulldoze and they don't really publicize, but the China are very proud and advertising. And so, it's just amazing that, it's not getting enough media recognition.
I think now this is the time where I'm really happy because all across the world, people are talking about it now. And this is what really makes me happy. I mean, 2011 is the first time I seriously understood the problem in East Turkestan. A friend who is from London, he was telling me about the situation there. And when he was telling me this stuff, nobody was talking about it at that time, but it was unreal. It was unreal what he was telling me actually happening. And then as the years went on, you started hearing more and more. And now, finally, we have all of this information available to us, which the Chinese cannot hide. And all across the world, people are speaking about East Turkestan. And East Turkestan, to the point that representatives have even gone to the White House. And there is a recognition of different bodies. And in European countries, they are safe to actually voice their concerns. And this is the moment. This is, for me, God willing, the point of inflection, that if we can get enough people to speak about this issue, this will be the new Tibet. But the only difference between Tibet and East Turkestan, I would say, is Tibet is relatively, compared to East Turkestan, safe.
Yeah.
As in the type of oppression that is happening in East Turkestan, you cannot compare it to Tibet. You cannot compare it to other places in the world. So maybe you can go now into the different, I mean, how is the situation now? We know that oppression has been happening for decades now, but what is happening now on the ground that people need to be aware of?
So there are a few areas that you want to look at. I mean, we talked about comparing things. So I normally compare it to, say, Palestine. But for the Uyghurs, Palestine is, if we were suffering like the Palestinians, many Uyghurs would be quite happy, because in Palestine, you still can practice, you can still have hijab, you can still pray, you can still have a beard, you can still fast. You can throw rocks at the IDF soldiers. The media is on the ground. When there is when someone dies or gets shot by the IDF, we know who that person was, what school they went to, what job they were. Eventually the family will get the body back and give them a funeral. None of these luxuries.
Wow.
None of these luxuries we have. Another thing, Mozambique himself mentioned, I would even compare that Guantanamo Bay is better than what's happening in East Turkestan, because in Guantanamo Bay, we have heard of people that have become Hafiz, they've memorized the Quran, they pray in Guantanamo Bay, they are able to fast. Yes, people were tortured, but there were even American soldiers who accepted Islam in Guantanamo Bay. So even Guantanamo Bay, Mozambique himself said, yeah, America's bad, like the US, you know, with what happened in Guantanamo Bay, but China is far, far worse. So based on what former detainees that were able to leave the concentration camps have said, is that they are put into cells with around 40 or 50 people. There's not enough room in the cell for everyone to be sleeping at one time, so half sleep, half do not. There is no proper irrigation system, so for each cell, they are given a bucket to do their toilets, and it is taken out every 24 hours. Every morning, they are injected with something, and at night, their blood is withdrawn. Before they actually go into these camps, their DNA, their eye, everything is tested. They're put into a database. I want everyone, when you've got the time, go into Google and type in the term halal organ harvesting. What is halal organ harvesting? We've heard that China has harvested organs to sell off to the West, and literally you can call up and you'd be able to get an organ within a week or two. Halal organ harvesting is this issue where Middle Easterners, rich Middle Easterners, come in to get organs, but they don't want organs from non-Muslims. They want organs from people that have, you know, stayed away from pork, you know. And so they literally, because they've got this database of Uyghurs in the system, they find out their blood type, and literally, and there are many articles and evidence for this. This is not just things that are coming out of my mouth. You can do a lot of research on this, that they sell this to basically Muslim, if we can call them Muslim, buyers, organs. And so in these camps, people are made to repent. Repent to who? Repent to Xi Jinping, who was the current leader of the Chinese Communist Party. Repent because these people were repenting to God before. So because you repented to God, that in itself is a crime. Now you have to repent to Xi Jinping. They are apparently on 400 to 600 calorie diets. They are made to watch propaganda videos from Xi Jinping of the communist ideology 3, 4, 5 hours a day. They are made to sing songs. Men and women, regardless of gender, are gang raped. this has been said, especially if you go into Al Jazeera, there are many interviews where there was one Uyghur scholar who basically went into a prison simply for opening up a Uyghur language school to teach children the Uyghur language, because even our language is banned in public arena. He himself said on Al Jazeera he was gang raped by 20 prison guards. So you can imagine what the women are going through. Now, people might say, okay, you can't practice Islam in public. What about in your own home? Again, look this up. 1.1 million Chinese officials are sent into your home to surveil you, to watch your every move. Imagine strangers, without your permission, live with you. They live with you. In the first phase of the concentration camps, mostly males were taken, anywhere between 14 to 15, all the way up to 50 years old. Males were taken. The women were left at home. Guess who comes in to surveil these women? Chinese official men. A lot of these women get raped. Girls get raped, 12, 13, 14. A lot of them fall pregnant. We've heard of many stories of suicide. So in, out, the only type of like worship that you could do is remembrance in the heart. That's it. Nothing. You can't do anything. Now, recently, very recently, there's a situation where investigators or journalists are put on stage tours. The locals are paid 18 American dollars a day to go and pray in the mosques as actors. That's what we've got now. So I can go on and on. Yeah, this is just,
This is, and honestly, I was thinking about this, that, Allah God puts people through trials and tests and these things. Yeah. People speak about the evil of social media. Yeah, they speak about social media. It's wasting time. It's this and that. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? This is the perfect time for you to highlight these crimes. I mean, you've spoken about organ harvesting. You've spoken about rapes, sterilization. I mean, those injections, as we know, and everything that you're saying, Arslan, this is not hearsay. You have major Western outlets which independently have verified these things from people that have come back, even to the extent that China has taken Kazakh women thinking that they're Uyghurs, and then they eventually had to release them. And then they have come forward and said, this happened to us, this happened to us, this happened to us. So look, I first want you to, before we go on into the role of social media and whether it works or not, because that's an important question, what I want to ask you is this. As a Muslim, what would your message be to non-Muslims about this issue? Why should they also be worried? Because obviously a lot of the human rights organizations in the world, a lot of the people who have this social media power are non-Muslim, and they do highlight issues. However, Muslims obviously are going to have more affinity towards Muslims, but what is it about this particular Communist Party and its actions, and why should non-Muslims take this just as seriously as Muslims do?
Well, we've seen that other countries, especially in the last 5-6 years, that have been bought off by the Chinese Communist Party, they are mimicking what the Chinese communists are doing. So with this whole surveillance state, many countries, even some European countries, have bought in. They bought their systems. What's happening in Kashmir right now? The Indian government is mimicking exactly what the Chinese government is doing. So if we let this slide, slowly, it's going to reach the doorsteps. We're already seeing a part of that in India and also some in South American countries. Don't think eventually this could go all the way to somewhere like the United States. I mean, imagine the control. People go, oh, it's not going to happen. You never ever know. I mean, slowly it's trickling down. So another thing I would say that many have realized, it's not about labels. I mean, these people are, in the end, people. They're human beings. We've seen people from all walks of life take to talk about and highlight the Uyghur people's plight. If we, as a human collective, in the end, we are human beings, and we should we share the same concepts and notions of freedom and freedom to practice and to live freely and to add to society. And the people that promised never again after the whole Holocaust, many of those have died. And it looks like the concept never again has died with them. So, yeah.
So, that is a very powerful example you gave, that surveillance state that everybody's worried about. And even with this virus spreading everywhere, people are worried about their freedoms.
Yeah.
Now, what if I was to play devil's advocate and say to you, Arslan, the Chinese government is telling us that these Uyghurs, they are extremists. They are, and Muslims, as you know, they are sick and tired of what we call the Khawarij, what we call people who go around like ISIS, and they just kill people, and this type of stuff. And there's so much extremism in spread, especially over the last couple of years, that if somebody wants to be an East Turkestan activist, they don't want to be labeled, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, they don't want to be labeled a terrorist sympathizer. So how can we support a cause when we're not really sure if those people, if they just want, to basically restart an Islamic state and start conquering countries, and non-Muslims are going to be like, why should we support this?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the definition of terrorism, we have to realize that it's not linked to any religion, color, creed. That's the first thing. We have to realize that there are people that do terrorism in the name of Christianity, in atheism, all types of groups out there. So that's one. Number two, China does use the narrative that Uyghurs are more susceptible to terrorism than any other group. So, we have to understand that many people around the world, including the UK, Pakistan, Australia, Americans, all went to Syria or all have joined terrorist groups, but you don't see those governments lock up their own Muslim populations.
Yeah.
What we say is the Uyghur, your normal general Uyghur, is not for terrorism. And we would say to any group, we would help you catch the terrorists. We're saying arrest the terrorists. Why are you labeling and arresting everyone? So if we look into my situation, my father-in-law is a very famous comedian actor. You can Google his name. His name is Adil Mijit, Adil space Mijit. YouTube, Google, he's everywhere. He's the equivalent to, say, Michael McIntyre or Jim Carrey, someone of this sort. And he was taken into a concentration camp. He's a funny man. He studied at the Central Academy of Drama in Beijing with who? Current Chinese president's wife, Peng Yuan. He studied with her. Someone like him was taken into a concentration camp for 7 months. So there are scholars, their narrative is these young people, we're trying to uplift them, we're trying to get rid of, for them to be extremists. Well, what about these people 20, 30, 40 years into their career, professors, writers, actors, singers, all these people that have retired, they were living in retirement, people that call themselves Muslim, but they have never practiced a day in their life. These people were taken into concentration camps. So, and there are even atheists and Christians among the Uyghurs, very tiny population, not even 1%, they were taken into concentration camps. So, and even our puppet leaders, as I mentioned before, we are an autonomous region. We do have Uyghur leaders, but we don't vote for them, and they say whatever Xi Jinping directs them to say. These people were taken into concentration camps, and they have been towing the CCP line, or they were worshipping. They were actual communist braggers. They were worshiping these guys, and they themselves were taken into concentration camps. So before we would say, people were involved in certain political activities and therefore they were arrested. Now we've come to see that regardless, as long as you identify as a Uyghur in any way, you can be taken arbitrarily at any time with no excuse.
I mean, that is absolutely crazy. I mean, the same people who towed the CCP line, they were arrested, and then people who are not religious at all. So look, for anybody who's watching this, who's thinking that, the whole rights movement for East Turkestan, this is linked in any way, shape or form with any extremist ideology. That is not true. In fact, if we look at the history of the Turkic people, they have been following traditional Orthodox Sunni Islam for centuries. You see, people who are more susceptible to extremist ideologies are people who they're not grounded within classical Islamic sciences. And in fact, there's even evidences to show this. There was a whole movement in, I think it was the Philippines, where just to stop people becoming extremists, they were teaching people Shafi fiqh, which is one of the four madhabs, one of the four schools of thoughts within Islam. So look, the Turkic people, or the people of East Turkestan, the Uyghurs, there's no issue to do with extremism. In fact, you know, what's powerful, and you know, I spoke about my friend from London. His brother, and this is 2011, his brother was a policeman, Uyghur policeman. And he was a policeman in East Turkestan. Even being a policeman, he couldn't express any form of faith. So he actually used to pray secretly, and he never missed a prayer. But, you know, so this idea that, you know, like there wasn't that much religiosity outwardly in East Turkestan anyway, because Chinese government had stopped that long ago, right? Outward expressions. I mean, in 2011, I remember him saying, you know, they discourage you saying Assalamu alaikum. Like, discourage you saying that. So, you know, this whole idea, how can you have extremist ideology happening when you know, when you have these things? So this is just a scapegoat. In fact, it's the easiest thing you can say. You can say, look, these people are extremists. And one other thing I want to do to reassure people watching this, the East Turkestan movement and the call for their rights and the oppression that's been happening, this has been now picked up by mainstream Western secular organizations. They wouldn't touch an extremist group with a barge pole. So if they have decided that this is such an important issue that we need to speak about it, and you know, we have Uyghur activists even who reached the White House, then clearly these people are not extremists. These people are people who are just simply asking for their right to firstly practice their religion, and at the end of the day, that land is their land. It's not the land which belongs to the Han people, and the Han people have their land and they have their land. In fact, like you said in the beginning, it's called autonomous, even if it's not. Why would it be called autonomous? Because it was actually taken over by China. So now let's go into solutions, Arslan, right? Because I want anybody watching this, whether you're Muslim, you're non-Muslim, whoever you are, every single day, give yourself a commitment to say, I will share something about East Turkestan. Now, we're all on social media all the time because of the virus. And before I do this, actually, Arslan, the question is, some people may be thinking, okay, if I share this happened in East Turkestan, well, the Chinese government doesn't care anyway. So what's the point of sharing all this information?
The Chinese, like many, say, Middle Eastern or Central Asian cultures, maybe even Pakistan, they worry so much about face, keeping face, saving face. So anything to do that gives from anyone from an Asian culture a bad face, they will try and defend themselves of that. There is something called, and to protect this face on social media, I want everyone to look up the term 50-cent army. In Chinese, this is called Wumao. China pays people to write good things or to defend. So you'll see, if you go on to talk to East Turkestan, and I'll share an article with you, and this was written about where pages like ours and other organizations are attacked on a daily basis by the 50-cent social media army. This is real. You can actually, there are many articles, it's written quite extensively about this issue. So to say that, what's going to happen if I share one thing? Why is China investing and paying people to write comments if this is not such an, they're paying millions and millions of dollars each year. These people make an income of this. It may sound funny, but you really got to do your it's real. So I'll give you one classic example of this. A 16, 17-year-old girl from the United States, I believe her background is Afghan, 16, her name is Firoza. What she does is, I'm not sure if you've seen this,
TikTok, yeah.
you've seen people do like lipstick makeup tutorials. So she normally talks about the Uyghur issue from time to time, but when she directly talks about it on TikTok, her video gets taken down. So she thought, I'm going to hide the video. I'm going to start off doing an eyelash tutorial, and in the middle, I'm going to sneak in some info about the Uyghurs. Let's see what happens. That video gets taken down. She puts it on Twitter, gets millions of views. It goes she's on every single news media outlet from A to Z. Eventually gets the Chinese foreign ministry talking about the issue. So raising, like, the more it's within daily and we're constantly reminded of it. Now there's this issue from a research point of view from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, where they've named and shamed 83 international brands with evidence that they are some way involved, what we're now talking about, in modern day forced labor of the Uyghurs, and which has now gotten the United States government to put forward a bill called the Uyghur Human Rights Forced Labor Prevention Act. That's being put forward by Senator Mark Rubio. So it does, the little things that we do on social media eventually accumulates into real policy changes, which will affect which will affect what happens in East Turkestan. Everyone needs to do their little bit.
That is phenomenal. And if you think about, a small action that you do, it can have a huge impact. Because look, it's very easy to say, okay, here's what China's doing recently. Because when I look at what's coming, the news that's coming out East Turkestan, it's almost like they're trying to get more creative in the evil that they're doing. Right? Just, okay, that wasn't bad enough. Let's see what else we can do. Right? So when I look at the situation, like you said, Arslan, it must be the case that they're very angry, because what I've seen them do is that they've taken reporters to Kashgar, to a mosque, and then the imam is like clean shaven, right?
Yeah.
And there's hardly anybody there, and the same reporter that came there, he came there before when the mosque was full and the imam had a beard, everyone had a beard, and now the imam is saying, oh, people, they don't come to the mosque because they're working. And it's such a poor, I have young daughters, right? Now my daughters, when they've done something wrong or they're trying to hide, it's so easy for me to tell, right? That was such a pathetic attempt by China to try and save face. And clearly, like you said, they're paying people to go to mosques or whatever, but they think people are stupid or something, right? People don't recognize this. Now, the brilliant thing about journalists is that they can pick up small cues, but here it's not a small cue, it's a flashing pink elephant in front of you that, you've got all this activity going on months ago and now you've got nothing actually going on. So obviously China cares. In fact, I don't want to name the name, obviously, and in fact, I don't remember, which is good, of a Uyghur, they introduced him like a scholar or something, who clearly was speaking under duress, right? And he was saying, yeah, everything's fine, everything's good. And you could just tell by the look in his eyes, right? Yeah. That he was just absolutely not saying what he believes. So this social media activism has a big impact. So what are some of the tips that you can give us in terms of where do we get information, where to post it, and how to do the actions which are the most effective? Because you can do lots of like a scattergun approach, but what are some of the things that you've realized that really are effective when it comes to social media and activism?
So, for example, we're working off hashtags. So, for example, with Me Too, we had a popular hashtag called Me Too Uyghur, UYGHUR. Currently, we're using the hashtags Made in Camps and Stop Uyghur Slavery, which talks about this very issue. So whatever current issues are happening, we're putting everything on the hashtags to make it easy for journalists so that they can so that they can write their articles from one hashtag rather than everything being scattered. You may want to follow some organizations. Our main and our strongest organization is called the World Uyghur Congress. They're based in Munich, but they've now got an office in Washington. And the main players or the main organizations in the United States are the Uyghur Human Rights Project, and they work closely with those senators that I talked about to get those bills going. And the Uyghur American Association, the UAA. So you can follow them all on Twitter and Facebook. I only post things about the Uyghur issue, and I also post things about what the Chinese are going through. But recently, for a good month or so, not much has been talked about the Uyghur issue because of this whole virus thing. It's literally taken over. But daily, we were getting out 10 articles a day for a good 2 years. So, and obviously our Facebook page, Talk to East Turkestan, it's currently the most popular Facebook page, Uyghur Facebook page, where you get your news. So, yeah, just stay in. Unfortunately, yes, we do have stuff on mainstream news outlets on television, but it's not as constant like Syria or Palestine or Kashmir at the moment. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, those are some great things. I mean, Twitter, not only the hashtags that you've mentioned, obviously, but anything that's happening, just link it to the Uyghur. For example, how the Uyghur population has been affected by the coronavirus, by COVID-19. They're forced to work in those horrible conditions, and they're more susceptible in the camps to the outbreak. Do you know any information about how that's affected the Uyghur population?
Well, yeah. So initially, when Wuhan was, were officially finally under lockdown, all flights in and out of Wuhan were stopped, domestic flights, except guess which city? Urumqi, the capital of East Turkestan. So for another good 24 to 48 hours, flights were going to and fro from Wuhan, direct flights to Urumqi. On state television, they've said that in East Turkestan, there have been 77 cases, but this was months ago and they haven't updated us on the situation. Fresh produce is being sent from East Turkestan to Wuhan and the provinces around them that have been affected, with Uyghurs being left to starve. Again, you can look all of this up. And people actually coming out on video saying, how am I going to feed my kids? How am I going to, we're starving. Uyghur doctors, I mean, while doctors from all the other Chinese provinces did not want to go, Uyghur doctors were forced to go into, the hub, the epicenter of the virus and do their work. And right now, as you mentioned, besides not getting news from the concentration camps as to if this were to, outbreak in the concentration camps, this would be very difficult to stop. But we're also thinking, would the Chinese mind, even if it did spread, and if one of your family members died, regardless of whether they died from the virus or not, they could simply just blame it on the virus. So very worrying times, but again, even more information is not allowed. And again, this issue with saving face, people sometimes go, well, we don't believe you, or we find it unbelievable. Don't believe me. Don't believe the news. One major question: why doesn't the Chinese regime let in the UN unfettered access? Why doesn't it give journalists unfettered access? People, I mean, I've seen the likes of Mohammed Hijab and other people go into the Rohingya and interview the people, and you guys were able to donate food and clothes. People are able to donate food and clothes to Syria. We've seen this. Any donation, any food, this idea of donating and getting unfettered access and reaching the people never ever happens. If a journalist is somehow able to get into the region, they are followed. They want to go in and make a documentary about the issue, but their documentary, 90% of the time, ends up talking about how they were followed by 10, 20 black cars.
Yeah. I've seen one of those. They kept waking them up at night and
Yeah. So if there's no oppression going on, let people in.
Let people
If
in.
you're not letting people in, that means you're hiding something. Simple as that.
Excellent. I mean, this is the points that you're making are so clear. I mean,
Cool, yeah.
anybody who, I mean, it's a simple thing. If there's no oppression, let them in. I mean, it's such a simple point. So look, the whole Chinese narrative on this is so weak and pathetic that, you know, as you can see, Arslan here is just slicing and dicing. He's just saying, okay, about this, what about this? And the powerful thing is every single thing he said, look, you can verify, you can check this out. I've seen this myself. Every single thing he's saying, I know what he's saying is true because I've been researching on this for a long time now. Now, just to end up on, inshallah, I really thank you for your time, and I'm sure the audience here appreciate it well. And we definitely want to have you again after some time. However, I want to end upon a small note from yourself. Now, where do you see this leading in the future if the situation does not change?
Last thing I want to mention with the oppression is while the elders are going into the concentration camps, the kids are being adopted away off to Han Chinese families, and they themselves, and those who aren't adopted are themselves being put into brainwashing boarding schools. Kind of like what happened in Australia for a good 60 years, from 1910 to 1970, we had something called the Stolen Generation, based on Australia's white Australia policy, where they took Aboriginal kids and adopted them off and forced them to marry white Australians. This is what's happening right now. And Uyghur women are also forced to marry Han Chinese men. And again, this has been documented. If this does not stop, the next 10, 20 years, the Uyghurs will not exist. And the Uyghur culture, you're going to lose a culture, thousands of years. We're talking and again, the first Turkic nation to be civilized, the first Islamic Turkic nation. All this history is going to be lost culturally, and China will just rewrite history as they do. We will lose something from humanity, from civilization. And this is part of the human fabric. This is what we're going to lose. This continues. And the reason why China is able to do what it does is because of money. We've really got to cut. It's very difficult because we always talk about boycotting China, and the world's economies are so intertwined. But I can't help but think that this is divine justice. Because right now, without even thinking, people are avoiding Chinese products. They're even avoiding Chinese restaurants, which I don't agree with technically. If you're in the UK and you're avoiding a Chinese restaurant, you're avoiding an English restaurant that sells Chinese food. This is how I look at it. But and we need to cut how strong they are financially, because technically, every time we buy Chinese, we are fueling these oppressions, which is similar. We want something similar like the BDS movement, for example. So, yeah.
Excellent. So Arslan, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys are going to take action. I'm going to take you guys to account on this. I'm going to keep reminding you guys. And one last tip to end upon. It's always powerful to have merchandise, and you can get fantastic merchandise about the Uyghurs. You can make it yourself as well. That shirt, a lot of people ask me, that shirt that I wore, where did I get it from? I actually got it imported from the UK. It came to London, took about a week or so, but you can get it done wherever you are in the world. You can just go to a local printing shop, give them the PNG files, which if you just put in Uyghur PNG, you'll find lots of PNG files. So that's a great way of creating awareness. And we as Muslims, haram is the word, it means forbidden, right? And in Islam, it's forbidden to despair of God's mercy. So the Uyghurs, inshallah, God willing, they will never, and they're a warrior nation. If you look at their history, they are warriors. they as a people, regardless of what they're going through, we will not lose hope that they, their culture, their religion, their peoples, they will be one day free to practice their religion and live, inshallah, God willing, like everybody else does. Thank you very much for joining us. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.